Welcome to episode 5 of My Dog Will Eat My Face. The title of this episode is What Do They Know of England? Who Only Know England. Now I want everyone to think about that phrase for a little bit. It's actually an old English proverb that I've come by in my life. And essentially what this proverb is getting at is, how can a person know where they are going? How can they be themselves even, an individual, without knowing other places and other lands and other people that are so different from themselves, where in understanding those differences, it actually brings them closer to themselves and their own identity. At least that is how I interpret it. If you're listening to this on Archer.fm right now, you're more than welcome to leave me a voicemail and tell me you disagree and you think I'm an idiot. But essentially that's going to be the topic of today's discussion. I wish to reflect a little bit on a lot of my upbringing as a teenager, actually. I'm not going to go back to, 5th grade or something incredibly boring like that. Hey, we colored coloring books for Mrs. Steve. No, I'm not going to talk about that because you all would die of boredom and defenestrate your phone. I don't want to cause that. So I'm not going there, but I am going to talk about the more exciting part of my teenage years, wherein I basically grew up throughout a lot of those years overseas with the help of two things. My parents especially, they helped on the money side, so to speak, but also I basically became nominated and selected to represent the United States overseas for a small organization that was once part of the State Department back in the day. I think it was founded in the State Department by Eisenhower's wife, whose name escapes me right now. So right away, I don't remember the name of the First Lady. But was it Marie Eisenhower? No, that can't be it. I'll think of it later. Anyway, the First Lady to Mr. President Eisenhower started the group, and it became part of the State Department. And the goal was to send students actually overseas to other countries to gain a better understanding, goodwill, and attain good relations between those two countries. So it was a pretty grueling selection process. There were interviews, there were write-ups you had to do. You had to go through a pretty lengthy selection. And lucky me, I was selected to go, along with my parents' financial support to go. And that's what I actually did throughout a lot of my teenage years, from about 15 to 18, 19 years old. So I was pretty lucky with that. And that's how I became really attached to this phrase of, again, what do they know of England? Those who only know England. My overseas travel started rather simply. It started in Australia, which was more like a vacation, to be blunt with you. A lot of natural beauties. I did see wild roos in the outback while I was camping out there. Took a submarine tour of the Great Barrier Reef. Hiked jungles and beaches alike. I got very close to Papua New Guinea on the far north side of Australia. Saw an opera at the Sydney Opera House. All those fun things. But the Aussies had a culture very similar to American culture. They're kind of independent. They're not dissimilar to the American spirit, is what I would say. So it was actually pretty simple, especially for me. At that time, I was only 15. And I went there, again, without my parents. And I even stayed with an Australian family for a good portion of it in Coffs Harbour. That's the name of the town. It's actually in It's actually, I believe it's in Queensland, Australia. And I even went to high school, Australian high school out there for a few weeks. That was surreal. Got bullied a little bit. That was fun. A lot of Aussies would yell at me. The kids would say, hey, Colorado boy, American boy, get over here. They'd yell at me and try to pick fights with me, and I just ignore them. Anyway, so that was... I found their high schools were not dissimilar from our own. You travel across the vast Pacific Ocean to learn it's just like it is back home in the high schools. That's great. Anyway, but I do want to share other adventures overseas that occurred later in my teenage years that did teach me quite a lot. And I want to give those examples today because I think this is not just me gloating or saying, hey, look at all what I've done, look at my travels, blah, blah, blah. It's not a resume. The purpose of this podcast is to really try to take those events and really absorb them and learn what I've learned from those experiences and truly how I think they've helped me keep my head up so incredibly well through this process of dying. I mean, let's be honest here. I am dying, and I've been told that many times. I get reminded of that every week at least once when the nurse comes, amongst other times when I interact with my home hospice team. I'm certainly reminded of it as my physical abilities decline, and I try to keep my head above water, and it is difficult. It's very hard to do. I'm going to leave it at that. And I do think, though, that a lot of those abilities to do so came from some of these experiences that I'll share with you. And some of these are things that I've not shared with anyone before. I am actually so grateful my mother has already passed away. She actually passed away only about a year and a half, no, two and a half years ago maybe, relatively recently. But I don't want her to hear what I did across the ocean. So, in a weird, messed up way, I'm glad she's not listening to this. But you will be, and please save your judgment to the end, is all I ask. So without that, getting into that further, I will get started with these adventures and what they have taught me. So a couple of corrections before we move forward. Apparently, Coffs Harbour is actually in New South Wales. It's just on the border of Queensland, actually. Well, not far from the border, I should say. So I was a little mixed up there. I had to make that correction. Also, apparently, the name of the First Lady for Eisenhower was Mammy. Who names their child Mammy? That poor woman. I think she went by Mary, though. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But I wasn't that far off with a name like Mammy. Anyway, be that as it may, I wanted to move on to thinking on your feet, which is, I think, an important aspect of the saying, which is the title of this podcast. The best example I have of that actually comes from my travels, and that goes back to Budapest in Hungary. When I was 16, I flew from Frankfurt in Germany. I was in Germany at the time, obviously, and flew east to Budapest. And keep in mind, this is back in the day. I'm not a young whippersnapper right now. This is, though, back when I was a young whippersnapper. I was 16. So this was before cell phones, Wikipedia, and all that. And to learn a language, there was no Rosetta Stone. There was nothing like that. You had to go pick up a cassette tape at like Barnes & Noble or something like that. And God help me, you can never find a cassette tape for Hungarian no matter how hard you looked. And believe me, I tried. my mom took me many times to Barnes & Noble to try to find a tape just on Hungarian, and it was impossible. It's non-existent. Apparently everyone thought, why in God's name would anyone want to learn Hungarian? We found something for every other language I needed in Europe, but not Hungarian. So, anyway, I landed in Budapest, not speaking a lick of English, got to the hotel. And one night, me and a couple friends of mine said, hey, look, it's like 10 p.m., 11 p.m. on a Saturday night in Budapest. Let's go explore the town. So we decided it might be a good idea to go explore Budapest in the middle of the night, not knowing a lick of Hungarian, by ourselves. So we decided to go do that. There's a big park right by the hotel. We decided to kind of walk around and explore. I don't know the name of the park. I didn't know it at the time. I don't know it now. But we walked around a little bit, and we were exploring for a while. And finally, it became around 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, and we decided, golly, there's not a lot going on. It's pretty barren and empty here, so let's go back to the hotel. And then we realized we were totally lost. We didn't know where at all we were in Budapest. And again, we didn't know any of the language. We approached people trying to speak to them in Hungarian, and they just mocked us in broken English, saying things like, hello, hello, hello. And that's all they could say in English, and that's all they'd say back to us. It was almost like they were making fun of us. And excuse me if I cough during this. One of the side effects of my condition is edema in the lungs, and it causes a buildup of fluid in the lungs, and it can't help me, or it can't stop me from coughing. So anyway, here we were in Budapest, Hungary, completely lost in the middle of the night. Finally, we come across a courtyard that had a bunch of men and vehicles kind of in a circle in it. So we approached them saying, hello, hello, we need help, hello, hello, we're lost, like a bunch of dumb Americans. Now, these men, they all kind of turned around and looked at us defensively. And that's when we realized all the cars were really nice. They were all Mercedes or BMWs or Alphas. And what the men were doing was they were changing the plates on the cars. Now, we were told before we went to Eastern Europe that there was a lot of Eastern European criminal syndicate out there. We were warned about that quite heavily. So we thought, oh no, we just came across some Eastern European criminals and we need to get out of here. So, again, pardon me. So what we decided to do is back away slowly and get away from these men and their vehicles in the courtyard. Now, as we're doing that, one of the men yells, hey, no, you, stop. You go with him, and he points to another guy next to him. He says, he'll take you home. Get in car, and he points to a Mercedes. Now that we were trapped and we had nowhere to run to, we stupidly, and we had no real choice, we got in the back of the car. Well, I sat up front with the driver. My two friends sat in the back. The driver gets in and says in English, what's the name of your hotel? And of course we couldn't say it. We're like, it's Prof something. It's Profka, it's Profska, Profkahaz, Profkaza. He goes, oh, Profesora Casa. And we go, yes, it's Profesora Casa. And I remember that name now to this day. Just because of that incident. And what it means is professor's house. The hotel itself used to be a faculty building in a university called the Professor's House. And they converted it to a hotel. And when they did, they called it the Professor's House Hotel, or Profesora Casa. So we said, yes, it's Profesora Casa. That's where we need to go. So he starts driving us around Budapest. And after a while, I realized he's not taking us to our hotel. He's going to take us somewhere and whack us because we saw what they were doing, changing the plates on all these cars. So all of us in the car are freaking out. But much to our surprise, what pulls up on the side of the vehicle is the hotel. My two friends in the back, being helpful as they are, dive out and run into the hotel as quickly as possible, leaving me alone with the driver. What good friends, right? So I'm sitting there, and the driver's looking at me with this long, stern look, like I did something for you. Now you have to do something for me. So I took out a $100 American bill, one that I've not exchanged yet, and gave it to him. Now for them, that's months and months of pay. At the time, again, this is lots of money. He holds it out in front of him. He nods politely, crumples it, puts it in his pocket, puts his hands on the wheel, and just looks forward, waiting for me to get out of the car. So I do. So we lived that experience. Again, pardon me. So I think that example of dealing with this group is one of thinking on your feet. And God knows I probably wouldn't have learned something that profound as what I did learn in Budapest, Hungary. So there's another example, though, and also in Hungary, where I probably didn't learn things too well. I should say. I was on Margaret's Island in Budapest, which is kind of like a hot sunbathing space in the middle of the Danube. There's a lot of topless bathing spaces and really not much more than that. I think some parks. It's just a little, kind of just like a little touristy area for the locals to go and sunbathe on the river. So my friend and I were there, and I said, oh, well, I got to use the restroom. So we stopped at a public restroom. I go in, and again, this is right after communism. So the restroom is just filthy. I'm sorry. It is just disgusting. So I stand far away from the urinal. And it's not because I'm showing off. It's because I'm terrified of the urinal. So I finish that, go to the sink. The sink works, but the towel is just like a regular fabric towel that everyone uses. It's disgusting. It's filthy. So I say to myself, I'm not using that. I'll just go out with my hands wet. I don't want to catch some horrible disease while I'm in the public restroom. Now, while I'm doing all this, there's a man in the corner watching everything I do. And I'm worried. I'm like, is this some pervert? Is this some weirdo? There's just this guy in the corner of the bathroom just watching me. And he's the only one in there. So I finish, and I start to walk out the restroom, and then this guy moves in front of the exit and blocks me. Says something in Hungarian that, of course, I don't know what he's saying. So I try to move around him several times, and he's blocking me in the restroom. And finally, he holds out his hand and rubs his thumb to his index finger, the international sign of money. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm being mugged. Again, I'm coming across some Eastern European criminals. So, thinking on my feet, what I do is I closed fist, punch him as hard as I can, right in the face, and run out the door. Now, as I'm running out, he says the only English I heard him say, and that was a big yell of, F you. No, it wasn't F. I can't say the full word on my podcast, but you listeners know what he said. Those were the only two words in English he knew, and that's what he shouted at me as I ran off. So I get to my friend outside, and I explain to him what happened. Like, wow, there was some guy demanding money from me in the bathroom. And my friend, who's Hungarian again, says to me, oh yes, in Hungary, you pay to use public restroom. He was a public official. You paid him, right? So I say, yeah. Hey, let's go. So I got off the island with my friend as quickly as possible without ever telling him what I did. Basically, I punched out a perfectly innocent Hungarian official. I probably could have gone to jail. So that's a good example of thinking on your feet, not a good way. But hey, I learned one lesson. So again, I think back to the title of this podcast is thinking on your feet, I think, is essential, especially in a situation like mine. With the struggles that I'm dealing with, I have to do that every day. As my condition worsens, I have to adapt. I have to think on my feet. I have to move forward. I have to find ways to make myself happy. And I think adventures like this overseas is one way to really learn yourself and to learn how you can do that and how you can turn a situation like these into something possibly good or something memorable or something that you can learn from and make better of it. Moving on, another important aspect of learning overseas, so to speak, that I have picked up is the simple concept of immersion. You'll hear this a lot from professors and folks around the world that say cultural immersion is one of the best ways to learn a lot of different things, certainly the most being about that culture or language. And I can vouch for one that it's rather true. In Italy, I had to learn Italian rather quickly. Thankfully, it was actually relatively easy for me for some reason, so I picked it up very, very well, as well as the accent. Maybe being half Italian helped. My name's Italian as well, so if I went to any function there where I had to wear a name tag, I definitely blended in, so to speak, with the locals. There was one fun event where I was in Venice where an Italian came up to me and asked me for directions, with which I gave, and then he asked me where I was from, and I said, I'm actually American. And he said, no, you got to be English or something. And he just could not believe that an American could speak Italian. He gave me the funniest look when I said I was American. He just didn't believe it. Anyway, so in Italy, I had to learn the language rather quickly. Same thing in Austria. Well, thankfully, I picked up German very quickly. And same thing, immersion. I actually, for a while there, had a private apartment in Tulln, which is not far outside of Vienna. I stayed above an Austrian family, which I would often hang out with, I'd have dinner with. I'd play games with the kids there. One of their sons was about my age. One named Valentine was actually about 10 or 12 to 12, somewhere in there. And we'd play board games together, physical games, we'd throw pillows at each other in the attic, stupid stuff like that, like kids do. And it was some intense immersion to learn the language, to learn the culture very well. In point of fact, Austria is the first time I ever learned how to ride a bike. I told my friends in the family there that I was staying above that I didn't know how to ride a bike. I never rode one before. Keep in mind, I'm 16. They didn't believe me. They're like, no, you seriously cannot ride a bike? You've never ridden a bike? And I was like, yep, never rode a bike. And so they insisted to put me on a bike and teach me how to ride a bike. So, at 16, finally, I learned how to ride a bike in Tulln, Austria, of all places. So, hey, you can learn other things there, too, overseas. Things that you should have learned at home, but just quite didn't. Another fun example of that is I've always had a fear of water. And there was one 4th of July back in Hungary where my friends and I went to a popular spot there called Lake Balaton, which is just a fun resort type area where people hang out, sunbathe and whatnot. And I was just kind of chillaxing on the beach area. I won't go in the water until some friends lured me in. I said, well, I just have shorts on. I don't have a swimsuit. Their reaction was, hey, it's Europe. Just go in your underwear. So I said, okay. So I stripped down and, gosh, I actually got in the water. It wasn't that deep. It only came up. You could stand in the lake where we were. It would only come up to like your neck. But nonetheless, being that submerged in water was a big overcoming issue for me, and so it's kind of funny. It took those overseas experiences for me to overcome my own issues and my own lapses at home. I learned to appreciate water and go into the water and not be afraid of it, and learn to ride a bike, both in foreign countries, never at home when I was a kid. So you never know what you might overcome through that immersion. And of course, the language, the culture, things like that. It's I think really important to understand yourself and where you're coming from, and to overcome your fears. It's amazing. I overcame my fears overseas, whereas I should have done so at home. I don't know why, but that's how it happened for me. So again, in that example, I think the challenge of going overseas and trying to learn and trying to adapt really taught me the lesson very quickly that is essential in life, and adapting and learning quickly is truly important. And through the immersion, it's really taught me that you might not understand an experience from the outside, but once you're within it, once you're experiencing it, once you're immersed within it, you have to learn it very quickly. Otherwise, you'll be in big trouble. In my case, I couldn't order food at the time. So that would be a problem. Now, in my case here, I'm immersed in hospice care. So I've had to learn very quickly how to adapt and how to accept it and to move forward. And strangely, I think that ability came from my ability to learn myself, and through traveling strangely overseas, which broke that barrier for me and brought me to where I am now, to where I can learn to cope and learn things in life still, even while I might be dying. Moving on, another item, so to speak, I can't think of a proper word for it. Another aspect that I've learned as I traveled a lot overseas came around the age of 17, where I actually went to Europe again, but only to the United Kingdom, primarily for school purposes. Essentially, what I did is I got qualified to go to a college at Oxford for some summer sessions when I was 17 years old. Now, the college I went to was Somerville College at Oxford. Now, if you know anything about Oxford, go ahead and laugh. The reason why I say that, for those of you that don't know what Somerville College is at Oxford, it used to be an all-girls school. And here I was. So, anyway, it's not an all-girls school anymore. Somerville is no longer that. But it only changed relatively recently at the time. So, it's kind of funny being one of the first boys at an all-girls school. But Somerville is actually where some pretty famous people went. Margaret Thatcher went to Somerville. Indira Gandhi went to Somerville, amongst a lot of others. So definitely some very high-profile pedigrees had gone to that college before me. So female or male or not, whatever, it's a pretty esteemed place. But at that point, it was open to males. So I figure that's why it's kind of funny. I went to an all-girls school briefly. But anyway, So there at Somerville, in the UK, the value that I learned there was I got to learn how the better half learns. And what I mean by that is at that time I'd already experienced some college work. And when I had got to Oxford, the process is truly so much different than the American college experience. You know, in the American college experience, you have lectures, you have papers, and maybe some professor interaction, one-on-one. You have office hours where you have to go to. And it's, I would say, very limited in your experience with the actual professor. Now, at least in the Oxford way of learning, it's totally different. Certainly when I was there were exams and things you had to write up. But for the most part, time was spent with the instructor in a kind of a sit down and talk basis. It wasn't a lecture in a big hall. It was you, maybe a dozen other people, where he would just sit down and talk to you about what the subject was. Almost one-on-one. It was very personal. It wasn't a lecture. It was a discussion. And that's the key difference between, I think, the British, at least the Oxford way of learning, versus the American college way of learning. And I truly did adore the British way of learning. So I definitely learned that there, that the American way of doing things is not the best. I think I learned more in my short time at Oxford than probably a whole semester in an American college. It's just so different. It's so personal. You get so close to your professor. I still remember my professors' names to this day, and it's truly a positive experience when you're in that setting. Now, it could just be because I was at Oxford. I don't know if other smaller colleges, less known colleges, are the same, but at least in my experience, it was certainly a better way of learning that I never experienced stateside. So, when I went there, it was otherwise uneventful. I mean, I'm not going to share any fun stories about college there, except making fun of myself because I went to an all-girls school. But I did get into one small fist fight when I was there with another college student who became offended by something I said and got really angry, was a little weird and psychotic about it, and he attacked me and I defended myself. That's about it in terms of anything interesting or funny there. I will say that when I went to outside sessions, outside lectures, I went to the London School of Economics for sessions and series, and those very much mirror the American experience. It's much more like a lecture and a presentation. You take notes and you learn what you can, and then you walk away from it. So LSE, or London School of Economics, was very much like that when I would attend events there, which I did as well when I was in the UK at 17. So it was a lot of learning, and again, it really opened my eyes to different ways of learning. It's not just the American college experience of lectures, tests, and papers. The one-on-one experience there was truly breathtaking and truly taught me a lot in such a short period of time, more so than I could ever learn stateside. Also, I would say that the living experience there was different. Just before I went to Oxford, I was at the University of Maryland briefly. And so I've certainly experienced American dorm living. I shared a room with one other guy. We had a small living area with, several other bedrooms. So it was actually kind of upscale. It was kind of nice for an American school. But very crowded. You shared a living space with other guys. Not very comfortable, cheap furniture. Just kind of low, what's the word I'm looking for? Low-brow kind of living. Now at Oxford, I stayed in a building that was centuries old. My window to my dorm room was just completely almost covered with vines. And I was in a room all by myself, which was really, really neat. It was a private room, and in it there was just a bed, there was an old desk, and what's cool is it had a private fireplace. What's sad is there is no central heating. So I put a space heater in the fireplace to heat the dorm room because there was, again, no central heat or air conditioning in the room. So it would get pretty chilly when I was there. But another cool thing is there's full maid service. When I would get up, a maid would come in your room and clean it. She would make the bed. She would offer to make you tea. And it was really nice. It was a really good experience there versus the American college dorm living, which is kind of a disaster. So I thought I'd just share that little bit of learning overseas, how different it is in America, and how you can learn things in such a different way, and how I apply that to me now, that I can't really do anything. I can't go anywhere. I can't go to college, obviously. But I can still learn. There are still documentaries out there. There are still people I can talk to learn things about. There are still other ways to learn. And what that taught me overseas is just that there is no single way to learn a lesson. And thank God I've carried that with me through this experience of hospice care and isolation, because my most favorite thing is learning new things. And if I didn't have that open mind, if I did not have that willingness and aptitude to learn things through a different means, I would truly, truly lose an important part of my character. So I thank God for, well, there is no God, but I thank the stars. I thank Valhalla. I thank whoever you want to thank for that experience and that lesson. For I carry it with me to this day, and it gets me through a lot as I suffer through this process. Now, at the end of my teenage years, I think I faced my ultimate challenge as I move forward here. At the age of 18, believe it or not, I went overseas, this time to the People's Republic of China. You might have heard about it recently in the news. It's not an all too friendly country. The interesting part about my trip, though, to China, well, there's a lot of interesting parts, but I think the most interesting part is that I was actually a special guest of the state when I went there through this program. Normally, as you enter China, you need a visa. I didn't have a visa, and as I went there, I didn't have a passport stamp because neither coming nor leaving, I didn't have to go through customs. I just walked right on in. As a special guest of the state, it was kind of surreal. When we landed in Beijing, me and my small group of American students that were trying to represent the U.S. there, they actually welcomed our group over the intercom of the airplane that we were on, saying, "Hey, welcome from the United States, this American delegation," etc., etc. So it started out with some pretty intense high treatment from the Chinese government and the Chinese people there. When we did enter, all we got was just PLA soldiers or People Liberations Army soldiers, just holding doors open for us and smiling for us like we were the best folks ever. And you normally don't get that from PLA soldiers, I have to bet. When there, we did stay at the Peking Hotel. It is actually just right by Tiananmen Square. It's right there in the middle of Beijing. And it was a surreal trip there. Just as a special guest, we got to go to the Palace of the People there on Tiananmen Square, which in itself is kind of surreal. You have this brutalist communist architecture like the People's Palace and other buildings, Mao's tomb, others, surrounding Tiananmen, mixed with the ancient, so to speak, maybe not, well, ancient, at least old aesthetics of Tiananmen Gate. The Forbidden Palace is gated right there on the north side. Actually, I'm sorry, I think it's on the south side, my bad, of Tiananmen Square. And also knowing what happened in Tiananmen Square there in, 1989, where they sent tanks in to crush a demonstration. It was rather surreal to be there, to say the least. But we did learn later on that the Peking Hotel was really reserved for foreigners in Beijing. And the reason why is the place is riddled with spying equipment. There are bugs in all your rooms. There are cameras behind the mirrors, and they bug all telephone calls. And it's basically a watch zone where they watch foreigners 100% of the time when they're in their hotel rooms or around the hotel to make sure they're not doing anything nefarious or to make sure they're just not a spy. Now, of course, we weren't spies, so it was benign to us. And I didn't learn about all the spy equipment and all that until after we left the hotel. That's when our, what should I say, our American organizers told us about that after the fact, so we didn't didn't act unusually, I should say, in front of this equipment that could spark some sort of suspicion. So they didn't tell us about it until, after the fact. So, knowing that there's cameras behind the bathroom mirror, I'm sure they got some excellent shows as I got out of the shower. That's kind of embarrassing. I definitely would have acted differently when I got out of the shower. I probably would have walked out of the shower with a towel right away. Be a little more modest in the bathroom there. But be that as it may, that's where we stayed in Beijing. Now, the whole purpose, though, was to go to Shanghai, which was our next stop. And the purpose there was to compose the second Shanghai Communique. The first Shanghai Communique was composed during the Nixon administration when he basically opened up China to the world, so to speak. And the communique was the understanding between the United States and China to basically open relations, open trade, and acknowledge for the first time the Communist government of China. So the purpose of this was to repeat it, to do a second communique to reaffirm those goals of the first Shanghai communique that the Nixon administration did, and basically do so with these students, so-called the future of the United States. So that could be, good press for the Chinese and possibly for the Americans too, if treated by the right folks. I'm sure if a lot of people listening to this now are gasping, thinking, how can you possibly help the Communist Party of China? But, well, lo and behold, I did. So, get over it. Anyway, my position with the Shanghai Communique was to represent all business and trade purposes. That was a pretty hefty section of the communique, and it was published, and it was made public. And, we met with our Chinese counterparts there in Shanghai and negotiated these points, and it was full-blown negotiation. What to put in it, what not to put in it, what to emphasize, what not to. And it was quite the experience, a very highbrow experience, being a special guest of the Chinese, Communist Party. We got treated with the absolute best treatment. We appeared on television for interviews. It was amazing. It was surreal, I'll tell you, when we would go into our hotel room one night and watch the television. Of course, it's all in Mandarin. And on one channel, I was watching The Simpsons in Mandarin. You can imagine Bart Simpson going, "Ni hao, man." "Ni hao wa, man." And that's the kind of Mandarin Simpsons I was watching in Chinese, all dubbed, of course, in China. But more surprising next, I saw some of these interviews with myself included and some of my counterparts on the television. And so it was unusual to flip from Mandarin Bart to myself responding to an interview on Chinese television, broadcast nationally across the country. So that was pretty amazing. It got really weird, though, I have to say, on my last night in Shanghai. And I've referred to this earlier in other podcasts, but I'll tell you the full story now. Pardon me. I was on a boat on the Huangpu River, just a boat tour with the American consul to Shanghai. Our whole group was doing this, and basically it was just a boat tour of the Huangpu River, which goes, again, through Shanghai, not far from the Yangtze. It's a tributary of the Yangtze River. And we just had dinner on the boat, and it was just kind of churring around. It was just a special treatment on our last night there. Now, the day before, or daylight before, same day, I did a lot of shopping on Nanking Street in Shanghai, which is a big shopping district in Shanghai, if you don't know it. But we walked around a lot, did a lot of shopping along that street, outside and whatnot. Now, Shanghai is notorious for its pollution, and I'm going to tell you that now because that's a lead into what really happens, or what really happened, I should say, and I'll tell you more about that later. But we did that during the day before the Huangpu River. Then on the Huangpu River, I told a friend of mine, an American friend of mine, that I was starting to experience some serious chest pain. And I was getting a lot of pressure and chest pain. And I was a little worried because of, obviously, my existing heart condition, which I knew existed at that time. And, of course, it was concerning. Now, excuse me. Now, my friend, who he was, didn't keep it to himself. He immediately told the consul to report it out of concern. And the consul decided that it'd be best to meet with his doctors at a hospital in Shanghai as soon as we docked. So, as soon as the boat docked, I was whisked away into an unmarked black diplomatic car. As it started to rain really hard. There was a typhoon off the coast, and so it was starting to come in, and it started to pour pretty hard. And I got just whisked away from all the American and Chinese counterparts I had. I got put into just an unmarked diplomatic black car and whisked around Shanghai in this pouring rain, all by myself, to take me to the hospital. It was surreal. It was like a Jason Bourne movie, I gotta say. But eventually we got to Shanghai University Hospital, which was even worse because what they did is they put me in a green hospital room. It was like lime green painted, no phone, no communication to the outside world. Again, no cell phone, no internet. Think of this is going back a few years. And they kept me in the room, and I told them, hey, I got a flight leaving the country tomorrow. And they said, no, you stay here with us. We'll take care of you. And I was like, oh my God, no, I have to leave the country. I wanted to go home. And they just insisted over and over that, nope, I'm not allowed out of the country. You stay here. And at this point, I didn't have my passport, and I was literally walked. Wow. I was literally locked. That's a tongue twister. God. I was literally locked in this hospital room all by myself. And they only let me out to do x-rays. And that was a scene right out of Resident Evil, I should say. It was surreal. I was sitting in a dimly lit hallway, with parts of the wall crumbling. Maybe it's better now, maybe it's better restored, but at the time, some of the walls were crumbling. There was a couple of double doors going to where the x-rays were, and the all that area was. And there was a double door with some stained glass, and not fancy stained glass, just, basically fogged glass on the doors with crudely painted Chinese characters on it. And you could hear through the dimly lit hallways in the dark people moaning and screaming in pain. And there I was waiting amongst these crumbled walls with people yelling down the hall for my x-rays. It was just so surreal. I tell you, it was right out of Resident Evil. And that was the only time I really left the hospital room. So eventually, I left the hospital room through the fact that there was one day, a few days later, well, no, I shouldn't say that, a few hours later, they came in and said, "Good news, you're being released," just before my flight was about to leave. And so, shortly after that, an American walked in that I knew, gave me my passport, and told me very sternly, "All right, come with me. We're going to the airport right now before they change their mind." So I quickly complied, grabbed my passport, rushed to the airport, and got out of the country successfully on the scheduled flight the following day. And what I later learned was that the Chinese at the time liked to keep American citizens in hospitals there that were ill and not release them until they publicly praised the communist medical system and degraded the American pain system. And there might be a lot of listeners that would say, "Hey, I kind of agree with that," but that was their MO, that was their motivation, and they had done this to other Americans before. And apparently it took a call from Washington to say, "Hey, you let this guy out of there, you let this kid out of there, or it's going to be an international incident." So, that being said, I've got whisked away to the airport and escaped the People's Republic of China on my scheduled flight. Now, what that teaches me today is, that was my ultimate challenge in my foreign travels as a teenager. At that point, I was turning about 19. I was going to become an adult. And it really taught me that I could probably survive almost anything. As dim and as dark as things can get, there could be a good surprise right behind the corner. It might be a call from Washington, and in my case now, hey, I might have a good day tomorrow. I know I'm dying. I know there's only one way to go. But it is up and down. Some days are better than others. And you know what? Maybe tomorrow just might be a better day than today. So, what do they know of England? Those who only know England. I repeat the title once more, just again to ponder that concept. And I think the point of this episode, of this podcast, is it's relatively simple. Number one, don't hit innocent Hungarians. I think that's a pretty good rule to live by. But there are other points as well. And this is why I think travel for an individual or a student, a kid especially, is so important. You certainly learn the culture and the people that you go and mingle with, and the language, of course, and all those benefits, the history. It's just amazing when you do travel and you learn those things in the location where these things occur, where these people live, or where this history exists, and you can feel like you can touch it. But so much more beyond that. I think, for me, at least in my case, it's taught me to think on my feet, and it's taught me how to handle immersion in a totally new situation, in a totally new dynamic, in a totally new universe. And for me, I think that is what has been there for me as I struggle through this crisis and through, unfortunately, my demise. Since I can't travel, I sure do miss it. I really do miss it. It's crushing to me, honestly, to not be able to travel anymore. But that being said, at least on the good side, I know I'm unlikely to hit any innocent Hungarians, so that's a bonus. And I'm probably not going to be a special guest of the Communist Party of China anytime soon. We'll see how the news goes with that. But I can take with me those lessons through this decline. And I just wanted to share that with others to illustrate how much you can get out of travel and what you can learn for yourself and how much it teaches you about yourself as an individual in this huge universe of ours. And with me, in my case, and I think this is going to be true for everyone, you'll be able to take that with you wherever you go and in whatever crisis you face. So, with that said, I just want to close pretty simply. Again, just as another reminder, what do they know of England? Those who only know England. And another reminder as I part today, don't forget to follow this podcast and set up notifications to come through. Usually it's a bell somewhere on the app. It differs a little bit from app to app, but please do set up a reminder to follow and turn on notifications so you do not miss future podcasts. And with that said, I will say auf Wiedersehen for now, and I will talk to you again soon.